Welcome to my cinema thesis for the greatest independent film of all time, 1977 Star Wars. This is a film that has inspired generations of filmmakers and fans with its universal message of having faith, of believing in something universal. This film truly exemplifies what it means to capture lightning inside of a bottle, due to the collaborative efforts of so many talented individuals. George Lucas, his wife Marsha Lucas, who edited the film, along with Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew, Gloria Katz and Willard Huyck, who co-wrote the film with George, the conceptual designs of Ralph McQuarrie, the epic and unforgettable score of John Williams, and John Dykstra and his peers at Industrial Light and Magic, who revolutionized special effects with the motion control camera. And the actors, Peter Cushing, Alec Guinness, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, James Earl Jones. The list goes on and on of all the talented individuals who contributed to this amazing film. So join me on this journey as we analyze the making and explore the themes of Star Wars, the greatest independent film of all time. Star Wars was released on May 25th, 1977, produced by Lucasfilm and distributed by 20th Century Fox, written and directed by George Lucas and produced by Gary Kurtz. Star Wars was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, including Best Screenplay, Best Director, and Best Picture. The film went on to win 6 Academy Awards, mostly for its technical achievements in special effects and sound design. For me, Star Wars is the greatest independent film of all time, and it is the prime example of capturing lightning inside of a bottle due to the collaborative efforts of so many talented individuals. While George Lucas definitely deserves his credit for coming up with the idea of Star Wars and drawing upon so many sources of inspiration to contribute to this epic feast of the imagination, I think that he should equally share this credit with the other talented filmmakers that contributed significantly to this film that are too often overlooked. Who am I referring to specifically? I'm referring to film editor Marsha Lucas, George Lucas's wife, the other Lucas, whose contributions to the original trilogy cannot be understated. I'm also referring to editors Richard Chew and Paul Hirsch and screenwriters Gloria Katz and Willard Huyck, who went uncredited for the rewriting of George Lucas's final script. I am referring to composer John Williams, producer Gary Kurtz, artists Ralph McQuarrie, sound designer Ben Burt, and John Dykstra, who created the motion control camera for the special effects and many more. All these talented people and their contributions to Star Wars are why this film is a masterpiece. This film was able to bring together some of the most talented individuals of their craft before they were even considered so, and the resulting film was like having a kitchen filled with the world's greatest chefs, cooking up one of the greatest meals. To get more specific in regards to some of the amazing feats that this film accomplished, I believe that Star Wars is arguably the film with the greatest editing in film history. The momentum, the pacing, the rhythm, the film grabs a hold of you and never lets go. The film engages you, you don't have to engage it. The film truly takes on a life of its own, and I believe that the reason why this film resonates with so many people and why it became the most popular movie series is because of the many sources of inspiration that George Lucas drew upon in order to make the film. Star Wars has a universal message that transcends all cultures, races, and boundaries because it tells the story of the hero's journey, which is a mythological archetype that has been around for thousands of years. And the reason why this archetype is present in all world cultures is because it is the quintessential human journey that we all go through. Some of the main sources of inspiration that George Lucas drew upon was from Bruno Bettelheim's The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales, and most notably, the anthropological work of Joseph Campbell, mainly his work titled The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is a work of comparative mythology that studies numerous world myths and theorizes that there is a consistent mythological structure inherent in all cultures, the archetypal hero. Some of these mythic archetypes can be seen in the mythological stories of Beowulf, King Arthur, and Homer's Odyssey. It's basically a coming of age story in which the first stage is the call to adventure, as the hero begins in the ordinary world, which can be seen with Luke Skywalker being a simple farm boy, and Luke's yearning to join the rebellion, and Obi-Wan's request to become a Jedi like his father. This is typically initially met with a refusal, which we see in Luke's initial decline to Obi-Wan's request to join him and to become a Jedi due to Luke considering the repercussions likely from Uncle Owen for running away with Obi-Wan. The following stage involves initiation with a mentor-helper like Obi-Wan, and the crossing of the threshold, which is when Luke enters the cantina and eventually leaves Tatooine aboard the Millennium Falcon. During this transitional period, the hero meets with allies, such as how Luke teamed up with Han Solo and Chewbacca, and the hero engages with enemies such as Luke did with the bully at the cantina and the stormtroopers. There are also numerous tests that they face, which can be seen in Obi-Wan's instruction of the Force on the Millennium Falcon, and Luke having to witness the death of his mentor, Obi-Wan, at the hands of Darth Vader. The hero's journey then continues with their transformation as they approach an ordeal such as Luke attempting to rescue the princess and escape the Death Star, and Luke attempting to destroy the Death Star with the one in a million shot, with the final test being him putting his faith into the Force by turning off his device and allowing the Force to be his vision to guide him. The final stage is the hero's return, which is a period of atonement. The great thing about Lucas's execution of this archetype is that it is present both in this film as a standalone and the rest of the original Star Wars trilogy. You have to remember that Lucas, despite his contradictory and revisionist claims, did not have Part 2 and Part 3 plotted out for the original trilogy when the original Star Wars was made. And because of this, Lucas implemented the full hero's journey into this single movie. The proof for Lucas not having parts 2 and 3 completed when the original Star Wars was being made is evident if you scrutinize the script writing process that is chronicled in J.W. Rinzler's The Making of Star Wars trilogy books and The Secret History of Star Wars by Michael Kaminsky. George Lucas's claims in the later part of his filmmaking career that he plotted the entire trilogy, yet alone the 6-film saga from the very beginning, are pure revisionism to prior claims that the story development of Star Wars was all an innovative process. When the original Star Wars came out, Lucas had no idea that Darth Vader was Luke's father. And when The Empire Strikes Back came out, Lucas had no idea that Leia was Luke's brother. Lucas made it up as he went along. And you know what? There is nothing wrong with that at all. Filmmaking is an intuitive process. This is part of the script writing process and the storytelling process for film. The issue is that Lucas likes to act like he is J.R.R. Tolkien and that he had everything planned out from the very beginning, which can easily be refuted by his own words, whether verbally or in print. Lucas makes revisionist claims about how much he had planned it all from the beginning, and I don't know if he does it as a PR move or because he forgets his original statements or because he's an outright liar. But again, there is nothing wrong with an evolving script or story, just as long as it all makes sense in the end, which I think George Lucas achieved for the original trilogy. Other sources of inspiration that George Lucas drew upon, besides the mythological archetype of the hero's journey, are the swashbuckling adventure films of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, such as Robin Hood, Captain Blood, The Mark of Zorro, and The Three Musketeers. It has also been well known how much the comic strips and Saturday morning serials of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers heavily influenced George Lucas, especially in presenting the episodic format that makes you feel like you stumbled into the middle of a story. George Lucas has openly recollected his experience when the Flash Gordon 20-minute serials were initially screened before the theatrical features, and unless you attended the movies on a regular weekly basis, would miss an episode or two and just be thrown into the middle of the story with the current week's episode. This was before these Flash Gordon serials began to air on television and were only shown before theatrical features. George Lucas also incorporated the fast-paced nature of these TV serials and their quick editing cuts into Star Wars as well. An additional inspiration for this episodic presentation were the Saturday matinee sound serials such as Phantom Empire and Tailspin Tommy. And without a doubt, the original space opera, John Carter of Mars, also played a significant role in influencing George Lucas to make Star Wars. When George Lucas was young, he was an avid lover of all things science fiction, and he especially loved to read sci-fi pulp magazines and comics such as Shadow Comics, Tommy Tomorrow, and Amazing and Astounding Tales. E. Smith's Lensman series also played a significant role in George Lucas's conceiving of the Jedi, with the special powered Lensman being the Galactic Patrol of the Galaxy, similar to how the special powered Jedi are guardians and peacekeepers of the Star Wars galaxy. If we review a brief summary of some of the central events in the Lensman book Galactic Patrol, we can see other ideas that are present in Star Wars as well. Now, Galactic Patrol tells the story of Kim Kinnison, a lensman who jettisons in a space lifeboat with a data spool containing the secret of the enemy's ultimate weapon, the Grand Base, similar to how R2-D2 and C-3PO have the plans to the Death Star. He then jets around the galaxy in his speeder, gets caught in a tractor beam, passes his ship off as a chunk of loose metal, eludes the bad guy star cruisers by tearing off into the fourth dimension, and finally destroys the enemy base in his one-man fighter. During his training, he wears a flight helmet with the blast shield down, but he can still see what's going on using his special powers. The Lensman's mystical powers are almost certainly a strong inspiration for the Force. In an early draft of the Star Wars script, Lucas calls the good side of the Force Ashla and the bad side the Bogun. In Smith's Lensman books, the benevolent creators of the lens are the Arisians, and the bad guys are the Bosque One. Lucas may have absorbed even the language of Smith, who uses the word Coruscant at least a dozen times. The Landsman series would eventually compose of 6 novels. Not surprisingly, Galactic Patrol is seen sitting on a shelf in George Lucas's writing room in the first Episode 1 web documentary. It is clearly one of the primary influences on Star Wars. Also, without a doubt, Frank Herbert's Dune also had to play a significant role in influencing some of the artistic choices implemented in Star Wars, with both tales telling the story of a young man on a hero's journey, and Tatooine resembling the desert planet of Dune, and the Bene Gesserit witches sharing similar qualities and special abilities with the Jedi, such as the ability to perform mind tricks and influencing the weak minded. Also, the Bene Gesserit witches practiced something called the Pranab Bindu, and initially Lucas was going to call the Jedi Bindu, and I don't think this is a coincidence. In regards to the influences that contributed to Lucas's conceiving of all the aliens, droids, and other creatures that are present in Star Wars, the creature features from Universal Studios such as Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoons, and the films from special effects wizard Ray Harryhausen also played a significant role. We can also see influences from Fritz Lang's Metropolis and the 1950 sci-fi classic The Day the Earth Stood Still for C-3PO's design. Furthermore, George Lucas's love for hot rods and fast cars and speed can also be seen in Star Wars with his high-octane dogfights and edge-of-your-seat space chases. Additional inspiration can also be seen in the Western films of John Ford, especially the film The Searchers, which can be seen in the scene where Luke returns back home only to find the dead remains of his family, Aunt Beru, and Uncle Owen. Now, these are the primary influences that George Lucas incorporated into Star Wars from his childhood. When George Lucas was a young adult and attended film school at USC, he picked up additional inspirations from being part of arguably one of the most important eras in American cinema, the American New Wave, which was the era of the American auteur. In the 1960s, film schools were new ideas. There was no such thing as independent filmmaking. The abstract counterculture experimental films of this time inspired George Lucas, in addition to many foreign films that were screened for Lucas during this time, such as those by Francis Truffaut and Akira Kurosawa. Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress was one of the most influential for Star Wars, and this could be seen between how both films take the point of view of their duo characters. In The Hidden Fortress is Tahai and Matashichi. In Star Wars, it's R2-D2 and C-3PO. Also, both stories are about a princess being escorted to safety, and both princesses are perfectly capable of handling themselves. The princess in Hidden Fortress is fierce and tough and only has to pretend to be a mute damsel so that she cannot be recognized by potential enemies. And Princess Leia from Star Wars is set up to look like a typical damsel in distress, but quickly takes charge of her own rescue once she realizes that Han and Luke have no idea how to escape the cell block. Furthermore, the famous film swipe transitions that Star Wars is well known for are inspired by Akira Kurosawa films. And frequent Akira Kurosawa collaborator Toshiro was initially offered the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but turned down the role due to the similarities that the Jedi share with the samurai, and Toshiro was concerned if the Japanese would perceive these similarities as an offense, especially if the film was to be a failure. During this time, another inspirational film was brought to Lucas's attention, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. I will even argue today that outside of the motion control achievements that were made with Star Wars, that 2001's model work and special effects look better than Star Wars. This film came out over 50 years ago and it looks better than all this CGI nonsense that we see in movies today. There was no doubt that the special effects of 2001 A Space Odyssey truly motivated George Lucas to take the depiction of space to the next level with John Dykstra's motion control camera system. In regards to George Lucas's inspiration for the Force, the New Age movement of the 1960s and 1970s, which is notable for when hippie counterculture turned to the philosophies of Eastern religions and thought, such as Taoism, for spiritual guidance. In addition, the works of Carlos Castaneda, specifically the teachings of Don Juan, were also popular during this time and played a significant role in how the Force was implemented into the story of Star Wars. In the book, Carlos, an anthropologist in the field in Mexico, encounters a shaman called Don Juan Matus, and he undergoes an apprenticeship as a shaman with him. He learns about an energy field that is very similar to the way the Force is presented in Star Wars and how this energy is made up of all things in existence, and how all living things are made up of the same energy. Now, while George Lucas was in film school, he came across the films of Jean-Luc Godard and found inspiration in the style of filmmaking known as cinema verite, which is a style of filmmaking that is characterized by realistic documentary films that avoid artificiality and artistic effect. It combines improv with the use of the camera to unveil truth or highlight subjects hidden behind reality. This influence can especially be seen in George Lucas's first feature film and a favorite of mine, THX 1138, which is a story about a dystopian world similar to George Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Some of George Lucas's earliest jobs in filmmaking before he made his first feature-length film were as a documentary filmmaker. He was a cameraman for the Woodstock documentary and the Rolling Stones documentary Give Me Shelter. And he also made documentaries about filmmaking for the movies McKenna's Gold and his good friend Francis Ford Coppola's the movie Rain People. Now, I truly see all these numerous influences present in Star Wars, and for me, this is just another primary reason why this film is loved by so many and why it resonates for so many people, because it draws upon so many sources of inspiration. Now, again, the importance of timing when Star Wars was created cannot be understated. It was a time of the American New Wave, the American Auteur, a time of collaboration among the American New Wave auteurs. This is why Star Wars was lightning captured in a bottle. In the late 1960s, the movie studios were being sold to corporations that had no idea how to make movies. The studio system that endured for decades had collapsed. So the new studio owners went to the film schools to find young filmmakers to make movies for young people, one of the most profitable demographics. Important films such as Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, Night of the Living Dead, and most especially the movie Easy Rider turned the industry on its head and showed film studios that audience had a desire to watch a new kind of film. And Easy Rider is known as the most important independent American film of all time because of its success and it being the first of its kind. Now, with the success of Lucas's second film, American Graffiti, the most profitable film in history, made for under $1 million and grossing over $100 million, Lucas had the opportunity to make his sci-fi opera film. He was initially going to make Apocalypse Now, but he couldn't do Apocalypse Now because no studio at the time would do a movie about the Vietnam War due to it being such a fresh wound in the country's consciousness. So he implemented the idea of a huge empire going after freedom fighters similar to the US and the Viet Cong into Star Wars. In regards to George Lucas's Apocalypse Now, it is interesting to note that his version would have been a dark comedy similar to Stanley Kubrick's Doctor Strangelove, and it would not have resembled Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece in the slightest. But George wanted to veer off into old school soundstage filmmaking and make a movie for 12-year-old kids with hope and optimism, unlike THX 1138, which was cynical and dystopian. George Lucas felt that children of this current generation lacked fantasy and myths, and most of all, they lacked true heroes. His generation had the westerns and the pirate movies, and he saw that the current generation in the 1960s and 70s had nothing but anti heroes like Dirty Harry. George Lucas took this observation and also saw that myths come from the borders of society, mysterious places, and in the 1960s, during the United States Space Exploration Program, nothing was more mysterious and captured the imagination than space. So George Lucas set out to make a space opera film for 12-year-olds. He tried to buy the rights to Flash Gordon but was denied the rights. So he had to make up his own story. The title Star Wars was registered by United Artists with the MPAA on August 1st, 1971, and he started writing it in 1973 after American Graffiti. No studio wanted the film until Alan Ladd Jr. of Fox believed in Lucas's talent, and American Graffiti became a hit. But still, no one truly understood the script and the world that George Lucas was creating. George Lucas's two-page handwritten plot summary had a curious title known as Journal of the Whills. It opened with a convoluted line: "This is the story of Mace Windu, a revered Jedi Bendu of Apuchi, as related to us by C.J. Thorpe, Padawan learner to the famed Jedi." The initials CJ or C2 stand for Chewie Thorpe of Kissel. My father is Han Dardell Thorpe, a chief pilot of the renowned galactic cruiser Tarnak. At the age of 16, Chewie enters the exalted Intersystems Academy to train as a potential Jedi Templar. It is here that I became Padawan learner to the great Mace Windu at that time. Warlord to the chairman of the Alliance of Independent Systems, some felt that he was more powerful than the imperial leader of the Galactic Empire. Ironically, it was his own comrades' fear that led to his replacement, an expulsion from the royal forces. After Windu's dismissal, Chewie begins to stay in his service until I had finished my education. Part 2 takes up the story. It was 4 years later that our greatest adventure began, where we were guardians on a shipment of fusion portables to Yavin, when we were summoned to the desolate second planet of Yoshiro by a mysterious courier from the chairman of the Alliance. At this point, Lucas's first space fantasy narrative trails off. And it's very interesting to see the ideas that survive this initial plot summary and bled into the whole saga as a whole, such as Mace Windu, Chewie. There's all different types of ideas here that were saved for later after the release of the first Star Wars film. It's very interesting to see how George Lucas's story evolved with each following draft. The galaxy is plagued by a civil war between an evil empire and rebel forces. Two bickering imperial bureaucrats try to flee from a space fortress which is under attack and crash land on the planet of Aqualay. A wanted rebel princess and her relentless general, Luke Skywalker, on their way to a spaceport in order to get the princess to safety, find and capture them. After a hazardous journey, the group make it to a religious temple where they discover a band of young boy rebels. The boys decide to follow them across the wasteland in spite of the general's reluctance, and they soon reach a shabby cantina near the spaceport where the general is forced to use his laser sword to kill a bully who is taunting one of the boys. The group, pursued by Imperial troops, must steal a fighter ship in order to escape, and after a long chase, they manage to hide in an asteroid field. However, the rebel ship is damaged, and they are forced to jettison towards the forbidden planet of Yavin with rocket packs. On Yavin, they travel on jet sticks made from their rocket packs until they are attacked by giant furry aliens who capture the princess and the bureaucrats and sell them to an Imperial platoon. Skywalker is almost killed, but one of the aliens helps to take him to an old farmer who knows where the Imperial outpost is. After an attack on the outpost, the general and the boys learn that the princess has been taken to Alderaan, a city planet and the capital of the Empire. After rigorous training, Skywalker and the young rebels man a squadron of fighter ships, and disguised as Imperial Rangers, they manage to reach the prison complex of Alderaan. They free the princess, but an alarm goes off and few of the boys are killed before the group is able to escape to the friendly planet of Apuchi. There, everyone, including the bureaucrats, are rewarded at a ceremony as the princess reveals her true goddess-like self. Now, according to George Lucas, because the elderly General Skywalker left little room for character development, he shifted that character into a supporting role and turned the protagonist into an 18-year-old named Anakin Starkiller, perhaps someone Lucas could better relate to and whom kids could better identify with. Anakin's brother Biggs is killed by a fearsome Sith Knight in the opening scene, and the Sith in turn is killed by their father Kain. Kain Starkiller and his friend, the elderly General Luke Skywalker, are the only two surviving Jedi left in the galaxy, having escaped death at the hands of the Sith Knights who have hunted down all the other Jedi Bendu. The two Jedi lead a rebel alliance against the Empire and destroy the Death Star space fortress. The Black Knight of the Sith and commander of the Empire's legions is Prince Valorum, who is assisted by his general, a man named Darth Vader. Again, as we see the progression of George Lucas's story, we can see ideas that are going to be retired and later recycled for the prequels. And I think this is all very interesting to see not only how George Lucas was able to form the initial Star Wars film, but also how he took some of these ideas and integrated them into the later films in the series. Even though it is far from resembling the final films, you could just see little ideas such as Valorum, names, things like that. Now, the next draft progresses and is entirely different. That's one thing that I enjoy about reading these drafts, is how they change and how they change dramatically. Kain Starkiller, a Jedi Bendu master, is in hiding on the fourth moon of Utapo with his two sons Anakin and Deke, when a Sith warrior finds them and Deke is killed. The surviving Starkillers head to the Aqualay system, where they are met by Kain's old Jedi friend, General Skywalker. Kain, whose war-battered body is a concoction of artificial limbs, knows that he is dying, and persuades Luke Skywalker to become Anakin's Jedi teacher. He then travels to the city of Gordon, leaving his son with Skywalker and the king of Aquile. Clegg Whitson, a rebel spy on the Emperor's planet of Alderaan, has learned that an Imperial fleet led by General Darth Vader and Governor Crispin Hodak is about to conquer Aquile with a Death Star space fortress. Rebel fighters are sent out to stop the attack, but the Aquilean king is killed, and instead of Princess Leia, the rightful heir, a corrupt senator takes over, surrendering the planet to the Empire. Anakin, Luke, and Whitson, joined by R2-D2 and C-3PO, two bickering robots who have escaped from the space fortress, bring Leia and her two younger brothers to the spaceport at Gordon, from where they can reach safety. After a fight at the cantina, where Skywalker uses his laser sword to kill his antagonist, the group meet up with Kane and his friend Han Solo, who is an alien, by the way, and Han has arranged transport to a friendly planet. They need a power unit for suspended animation in order to get past Imperial scanners, and Kane heroically rips one from his body, causing his death. After avoiding a trap set by Darth Vader and Prince Valorum, the Black Knight of the Sith, the rebels are pursued into space, where the arguing Leia and Anakin realize that they love each other. Their craft is damaged in an asteroid field, and Whitson dies as it explodes. But the others abandon ship in time and land on the jungle planet of Yavin, where Leia is captured by alien trappers. Anakin tries to rescue her, but only succeeds in freeing 5 Wookiees, huge, gray, and furry beasts, and Leia eventually ends up in the hands of the Empire. After a tip from 2 anthropologists, the rebels and the Wookiee tribe, including Prince Chewbacca, attack an Imperial outpost and a forced battle ensues. When he learns that Leia is held captive aboard the space fortress, General Skywalker starts training the Wookiees to fly fighter ships in order to conquer the Death Star. Anakin is skeptical of the plan and gets onto the fortress, along with R2, on a mission of his own. Dressed as an Imperial Sky Raider, but he is soon captured and tortured by Darth Vader. Valorum sees this and realizes that the Imperials are completely without honor and codes, and that he has more in common with the young Jedi than the Emperor. Turning his back on the Empire, he frees both Anakin and Leia, and they escape down a garbage chute. After almost being crushed in the garbage receptacle, Valorum, Leia, Anakin, and R2 manage to abandon the station just before the Wookiees destroy it, killing both Vader and Governor Hodak. Back in her throne room, Queen Leia honors the heroes, including Valorum, and Anakin is appointed the new protector of Aquile. I find it fascinating that we can see a hint of the Darth Vader redemption arc with this Valorum character renouncing the Empire once he sees that they have no honor or no code of ethics. I feel like this was a small precursor to the Vader story. Obviously, there is no hint of the main protagonist being related to the main antagonist in any shape, form, or fashion, but we can see how George Lucas's ideas evolve, and it's very fascinating. This Valorum character was also possibly based off General Tatokoro from the Hidden Fortress, continuing Lucas's porting of Kurosawa film. In that film, the heroes are captured and about to be executed when an arch opponent of General Maccabi is kind of like the Kenobi character, named Luke Skywalker in this draft that I just read, and also a leader in the clan about to execute them, comes to pay his last respects. Since he has lost the duel to Maccabi earlier in the film, his master has punished his defeat by hideously scarring him. The captured princess remarks that General Tatokoro's master must be cruel to punish him so brutally, and Tatokoro realizes that the heroes are nobler than his own forces, and he turns on his men, freeing the heroes and escaping with them to safety. This was directly adapted to Lucas's rough draft in Prince Valorum. Valorum himself also displays many of the future Vader mannerisms, such as being a feared Sith warrior and dressing in black. Now, in addition to the Eastern religions, the counterculture fascination among the hippies with the New Age movement and Eastern philosophies and religions, and Carlo Castaneda's books, another inspiration for the Force could be seen in Arthur Lipsett's film 2187. So, George Lucas found this film really influential during his years at USC. In one of the film's more memorable moments, the life energy of the universe, or God, is referred to as a force, again showing that the term and concept were common among counterculturalists long before Lucas made it famous. The audio clip Litset sampled comes from a conversation between artificial intelligence pioneer Warren S. McCulloch and cinematographer Roman Kreuter. McCulloch argues that living beings are simply highly complex machines, but Kreuter replies that there is something more to the universe. Many people feel that in contemplation of nature and in communication with other living beings, they become aware of some kind of force or something behind this apparent mask which we see in front of us, and they call it God. Steve Silberman brought the similarity to Lucas's attention in a 2005 interview with Wired magazine, to which George Lucas said that his use of the term was an echo of that phrase in 2187. George Lucas states that the force of others is what all basic religions are based on, especially the Eastern religions, which is essentially that there is a force, God, whatever you want to call it. The expression is a variation on the Christian phrase, "May the Lord be with you and your spirit," which was often written by St. Paul. I have come to the conclusion that there is a force larger than the individual, George Lucas says. It is controlled by the individuals and it controls them. All I'm saying is that the pure soul is connected to a larger energy field that you would begin to understand if you went all the way back and saw yourself in your purest sense. In the following draft, the Kyber Crystal makes its appearance. Deke and Clegg, sons of the Star Killer, are on their way to their brother Luke on the planet Utapo, sent by their father to retrieve the diamond-like Kyber Crystal, which a Jedi can use to intensify either side of the Force 100-fold. However, their ship is boarded by Lord Darth Vader, a Black Knight of the Sith, and his stormtroopers, and Clegg is killed. Vader believes that Deke is the last son of the Star Killer, and as Deke wears his father's crest, the Lord takes for granted that the Star Killer is dead, and that he has altered destiny by capturing the Son of Suns. Vader orders the attack of the rebel base on Organa Major, not knowing that R2-D2 and C-3PO, two of Deke's robots, have escaped to Utapo in order to bring a message to Luke. After a run-in with some filthy Jawa scavengers, they reach the farm where Luke lives with his two younger brothers, Biggs and Wendy, his uncle Owen Lars and Aunt Beru, and their daughter Leia. Luke has never met his legendary father, and when he learns that he must bring the crystal to him, he feels intimidated. Owen has taught Luke the ways of a skilled warrior, including the laser sword, but the spiritual ways of the Jedi can be taught only by his father. Accepting his destiny, Luke takes the crystal and leaves with the droids for the spaceport at Mos Eisley. There, Luke is forced to use his laser sword against three drunken creatures in a cantina, impressing Han Solo, who claims to be a star pilot, and his companion Chewbacca, who offer Luke passage to Organa Major for a huge sum of money. Han, who is merely a cabin boy, fakes a reactor failure on board his Captain Oxus's ship, tricking Oxus and the crewman Jabba the Hutt into evacuating. Han and Chewbacca, together with the ship's science officer Montross Holdak, then lift off with Luke and the droids. They reach Organa Major only to find it completely destroyed. Believing his father is dead, Luke assures Han that his brother Deke will provide payment for the passage, but they will have to rescue him from the Imperial dungeons of Alderaan. Approaching Alderaan, they hide in a secret compartment as the ship is towed inside the Imperial city. Their ship is searched without result, as Han and Luke take out two stormtroopers and steal their uniforms. Montross stays behind as Han, Luke, and Chewbacca and the droids leave for the detention area. They find the tortured Deke, and after escaping a horrible dungeon monster, Chewbacca manages to bring him back to the hangar. Luke and Han, however, are cornered by Sith Knights and forced to jump down a debris chute, ending up in a garbage room where they are about to be crushed when the droids rescue them. They reach the ship and blast off into space, defeating their pursuers in a dogfight. As Luke uses the Kyber Crystal to heal his brother, he receives a mental message from his father, telling him to come to the new rebel base on the fourth moon of Yavin. On the jungle moon, Luke meets his wizened old father for the first time, but the Death Star, the battle station which destroyed Organa Major, is approaching, and Luke's Jedi training will have to wait. An assault on the station is organized, but Han, content with his momentous award, leaves with Chewbacca and Montross, refusing to help. With 3PO and the Ranger Bail Antilles as his gunners, Luke pilots one of the rebel ships attacking the Death Star, while his father uses the crystal to fight the Bogan. Sensing the Ashla, Lord Vader realizes that the Star Killer is alive and joins the battle in his own fighter. He is just about to destroy Luke's ship when Han appears, sending the Sith Knight to his doom. In a final attempt, both 3PO and Antilles manage to hit the station's weak point, reducing the mighty fortress to space dust. Back at the base, the heroes are greeted by the Star Killer, who praises their victory as the start of a revolution. Now we can see in this draft that the film that we know as Star Wars, aka A New Hope, is slowly coming together. What's missing right now is that damsel in distress, Leia. And you can kind of see the Obi-Wan Kenobi character emerging in Montross. And what happens is the Montross character and the father character that is the Jedi become one. And then in the next draft, Luke's father is completely removed from the picture. Obviously, he's dead. So it's nice to see the progression of the story, and we can also see ideas that will be used later in the saga, such as the Sith Knights. If you are familiar with the original trilogy, you know the Sith, the name of the Sith Knights, just any lore in regards to the Sith is not even mentioned in the original trilogy films. And it's very fascinating to see all these ideas be recycled later for the prequels and the lore of Star Wars, the comics, the novels, the video games, etc. So, even though George Lucas did not have the original trilogy and the six-film saga planned out like he likes to present, He did have some of the ideas there. I do not discredit him for that. And I find it fascinating to read these ideas in these previous drafts for the original Star Wars film. Now, as the story continued to evolve, George Lucas ultimately took the Kyber Crystal out of the story. George Lucas said, "I think I'm taking the Kyber Crystal out. I thought it really detracted from Luke and Vader and made them too much like Superman, and it's hard to root for Superman." In regards to the hero's journey, George Lucas said, "Usually, the hero has come to a decision on his own by observing and realizing the position he's in and moving forward. This time, the hero avoids that position, but then I have the position thrust upon him because it's inevitable. I'm taking the existential view and putting a slight determinist slant on it. I believe in a certain amount of determinism from an ecological point of view. It's that things essentially reach their equilibrium. If you don't live a certain way, ecologically speaking, you will be forced into a position that will level it. What I call unpoetic state will eventually become a poetic state because an unpoetic state will not last. It can't. It's like economics. It's like life. It's like animals. It's like everything. You can set up an artificial reality, but eventually it will equalize itself and become real. When the challenge comes with Ben at his home after he gets Leia's message, Luke immediately rejects it. He wants to go fight the Empire. You can tell that he wants to, but he doesn't feel that he can take on the responsibility. As a result, destiny comes into play, because if you don't do anything about the Empire will eventually crush you. There was a scene where his friend Biggs explains that you can't avoid the issue forever. Eventually, it will catch up with you, and then you will suffer the consequences. To not make a decision is a decision. It happens in all countries when a certain force, which everybody thinks is wrong, begins to take over and nobody decides to stand up against it. Or the people who stand up against it can't rally enough support. What usually happens is a small minority stands up against it, and the major portion are a lot of indifferent people who aren't doing anything one way or the other. And by not accepting the responsibility, those people eventually have to confront the issue in a more painful way, which is essentially what happened in the United States with the Vietnam War. Now, I really enjoy that quote from George Lucas, especially how it refers to the deleted scene from A New Hope that was featured on the Blu ray release that shows this conversation between Biggs and Luke Skywalker. And Biggs is basically telling Luke that he can't run away from the war forever. Now, some storytelling elements were brought into Star Wars from George Lucas's ideas for Apocalypse Now. Lucas was continually aided by the transference of his Apocalypse Now ideas to the fantasy realm. Some of his notes scribbled on yellow legal pads are: theme: Aqualay is a small independent country like North Vietnam, threatened by a neighbor or provincial rebellion, instigated by gangsters, aided by empire. Fight to get rightful planet back. Half of system has been lost to gangsters. The empire is like America 10 years from now, after gangsters assassinated the emperor and were elevated to power in a rigged election. We are at a turning point: fascism or revolution. Now, moving on, George Lucas decided to hire his screenwriting friends Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz for their verbal expertise. Just before I started to shoot, I asked them to help me rework some of the dialogue, Lucas says. At the very last minute, when I finally finished the screenplay, I looked at it and I wasn't happy with the dialogue I had written. Some of it was alright, but I felt it could be improved. So I had Willard and Gloria help me come up with some snappy one-liners. And now I think is a good opportunity to acknowledge the contributors to Star Wars besides George Lucas that made Star Wars great, and Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz are some of those people. They were pivotal in making the dialogue witty and giving it that sharp comedy and all that. And I am very grateful for their contributions because everybody knows that George Lucas has challenges with writing scripts and he has challenges with working with actors. His words, not mine. Trust me, there's plenty of documented evidence verbally and through written interviews where George acknowledges that writing and working with actors is not his strongest suit. Another contributor to Star Wars that had a significant impact on what made it so great was from his wife, Marcia Lucas, who also worked on The Rain People, which George Lucas made a documentary about. And she also worked in a film called The Candidate. She also worked on THX 1138, George Lucas's first film. She also worked on American Graffiti, Star Wars trilogy. She edited all the Star Wars original trilogy films. Marcia Lucas is considered one of the best film editors from the American auteur era. Not only is she one of the best female editors, she is one of the best editors, period. And I say that feeling like Star Wars is probably the greatest edited film of all time because of its pacing and its momentum. Other films that Marcia Lucas also edited and worked on were Martin Scorsese's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Taxi Driver, and New York, New York. I mean, oh my God, she edited Taxi Driver, one of the most important and greatest American films of all time. And not only did she edit the original trilogy films, she also had major contributions to dialogue and certain scenes, which I will contribute a good segment of this video to later. But now I just want to address this notion that exists in some of the circles of the internet and fan community that thinks that Marcia Lucas single-handedly saved this movie all by herself, which is just not true. George Lucas himself is also a great editor. George Lucas took footage from World War II films that had dogfights and edited it together in order to show Industrial Light and Magic what to do with the developing motion control technology that they were doing for the motion control cameras. So George Lucas had the fast pacing and momentum and rhythm in his mind. He knew what he wanted. So this whole notion that Marcia Lucas saved the film all by herself, it's just not true. And not only that, but there were also other editors involved. It wasn't just Marcia Lucas who edited the film all by herself. What about Richard Chew and Paul Hirsch? Paul Hirsch, Richard Chew, and Marcia Lucas won the Academy Award for Best Editing for this film. So they share in some of the glory as well. And it was George's decision to fire the original editor because he just was not pleased with the work. The original editor was editing the movie in an old school, traditional manner. It lacked energy, it lacked pacing, it lacked momentum, it lacked that energetic, upbeat rhythm that we love and are familiar with in these blockbuster films today. So George Lucas fired the original editor and brought in Marcia Lucas, Richard Chew, and Paul Hirsch to resolve the issue. And what would this film be without the contributions from James Earl Jones? The guy's iconic voice is just, it cannot be understated. His contributions in the creation of the iconic Darth Vader character. James Earl Jones is Darth Vader. And let's not overlook the contributions from producer Gary Kurtz, who was another person that George Lucas could bounce ideas off of, and who wasn't afraid to challenge George Lucas with some of his ideas and to basically give him recommendations and how and where to take the story. Gary Kurtz was sorely missed in Return of the Jedi and in the prequel trilogy. And I'm not saying that those films weren't good. I'm just saying his contributions, his ideas for what to make these Star Wars films were a lot more adult driven. And that's what I take from some of the interviews that I see from Gary Kurtz. I really appreciate the impact that he had on this film and the impact that he had in the sequel, especially The Empire Strikes Back, which we will cover definitely at a later date. And let's not overlook the contributions of the master, John Williams, the greatest musical composer for film of all time. That's all that has to be said, and that is all that will ever be said of the man. He is the greatest. His body of work is unprecedented and cannot be touched by no other film composer. And let's not forget the sound design of Ben Burtt, who literally created the sound for a galaxy that does not exist. Everything that we love as far as sound that exists and comes from the Star Wars galaxy came from Ben Burtt's genius. These iconic sounds, the lightsaber, the blaster sounds, everything, the X-Wings, the Millennium Falcon, it all came from Ben Burtt's genius, Ben Burtt's sound design, and for that I am forever grateful. And also, let's not overlook the work of Ralph McQuarrie, whose artwork and conceptual art is just, it cannot be understated. Without his work, Fox wouldn't have gave the go ahead to make the film because they had no idea what George Lucas was talking about in his screenplays and story treatments. It was Ralph McQuarrie that provided a visual and that gave Fox an idea on what the film would be like. Now, a significant contribution that Ralph McQuarrie and George Lucas made together was the look of Darth Vader, most notably his mask. Originally, Darth Vader's mask was intended for him to survive in the vacuum of space as he crossed between two ships to attack the rebels. Now, the McQuarrie design that shows Darth Vader in his breathing mask was made before the Obi-Wan character was created and the infamous duel on Mustafar, were even invented or conceived. Ralph McQuarrie states, George asked me to create a guy with a cape that fluttered in the wind, with a wide brim helmet like the headgear of a medieval samurai. Early in the script, there was a description of Vader crossing between two ships in space. So I created this mask so he could breathe in space. With the suggestion of teeth and the mask's grill work, George loved it. George came along in about a week with a little bundle of stuff he'd gotten out of old science fiction magazines of the 1930s and material like that. George also supplied some books on Japanese medieval stuff. George had mentioned him having to wear a helmet like a Japanese medieval warrior, one of those big flared out helmets, and I made it somewhere between that and a German World War II helmet. In probably one day, I made all the drawings that pretty much define Darth Vader. I was moving very fast and didn't have all week to fool around with Darth Vader. I had lots of other things to work on. George was very happy if you came up with some ideas that was completely different. George didn't envision Darth Vader with a mask. He said he might have his face covered with black silk, but I got worried for Vader's health because he had to transfer to another spacecraft through outer space with stormtroopers who had armored spacesuits. George said, well, all right, give him some kind of breath mask, which he wore through all three films. So I thought that was a very interesting observation as we see the progression of the iconography of Darth Vader and the development of his character. You have to remember that the whole story with Luke's father being Darth Vader was not at this time an idea that had come to fruition. Luke's father and Darth Vader were separate characters, nor was Leia Luke's sister. Also, another interesting thing is that Darth was also the character's first name and not a title. So, this is just another interesting observation as we see the progression of the Darth Vader character and just the whole Skywalker story, the Skywalker family. When A New Hope came out, Luke was not intended to be Darth Vader's son, and Leia was not intended to be his sister. We see how the story progresses, how George Lucas made it up as he went along with each subsequent film, and there's nothing wrong about that. That is part of filmmaking. Other evidence that is well documented that George Lucas did not have the six film saga conceived from the very beginning is that he was calling Star Wars, the original Star Wars, Episode 1, not Episode 4. And this illustrates that George Lucas did not have the prequels in mind when he was developing this film. Other notable contributions made to this film were from George Lucas's friends, Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese, and Phil Kaufman. Francis Ford Coppola was someone that George Lucas could bounce ideas off of. And George shared the dailies of Star Wars with Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese, and Phil Kaufman. It is quite known that Brian De Palma was brutal with his criticism of Star Wars when it was initially screened for him. Steven Spielberg believed that George Lucas had something special from the very start. He was a believer, but Brian De Palma just did not get it. But you have to remember when this was screened for him, the dailies were shared with him, there was no John Williams score, the special effects weren't even nowhere near to completion. But I just find it very interesting that George Lucas, he was open to criticism during this time in his life. And I think this helped contribute to the epicness and the impeccability of this film. The reason why it was so good is because it was a collaborative effort and he had so much input to work off of. George Lucas completed something that had never been done before. George Lucas brought together the talents of prestigious British film veterans with an unproven band of hippie film nerds. Because he realized no existing studio could produce the special effects that the movie required, he decided to build a new company which was Industrial Light and Magic, the company that is easily the greatest producer of special effects for movies today. John Dykstra's Academy Award winning work for this film cannot be overlooked. John Dykstra built the motion control camera for the special effects for this film that revolutionized the industry. Colin J. Cantwell, who produced some of 2001 Space Odyssey special effects, also made significant contributions, as well as Douglas Trumbull, who was the special effects cameraman, and Dennis Muren, who later on in the Star Wars trilogy had a more pronounced role in the producing of the special effects for the films Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, as well as the Star Wars prequels. Also, the work of Joe Johnston, who is now a great film director with works such as Captain America, The First Avenger, The Rocketeer, also had a significant role in how the special effects turned out because he was one of the conceptual artists for the models. I really enjoy observing how Joe Johnston's career progressed, how he started out with this epic film Star Wars as a conceptual artist and grew to be a prestigious film director in his own right. Now, in regards to the special editions that were released in 1997 that made alterations to the film, I really prefer the theatrical cut because I like the authenticity of the theatrical cut. I like that the title is Star Wars and not A New Hope. The original title was Star Wars. When this film was released in 1977, there was no such thing as A New Hope. And I think George Lucas's attempts at suppressing the theatrical cuts was wrong all the way up to 2004 when he did finally release the Laserdisc versions on DVD. So for that, I am grateful because he brought it into the digital age. People like Harmy, who created the despecialized editions, were able to take these Laserdisc versions that were now on a digital format and upconvert them to a high definition format and use rotoscoping combined with other elements to bring the theatrical cuts into the modern age so they can be appreciated by the Star Wars fan community. I think George Lucas was a little naive with his initial statement when he said that the theatrical cuts would disappear because they would no longer exist and people would just basically be appreciative of the official Lucasfilm versions. But I think he really underestimated the passion of the fans and the passion of the fan edit. So I think he relented when he released the Laserdisc versions on DVD, and I'm glad he did because things like the Jabba the Hutt sequence in A New Hope really upset me. I really think they look ridiculous. I think the scene ruins the pacing, the Academy Award winning pacing of the film. And I think that the sequence ruins the Jabba the Hutt character because it is clear as day that the initial intention was for Jabba the Hutt to be a human. And to have Han Solo step on CGI Jabba the Hutt's tail totally undermines the character that we see in Return of the Jedi. It ruins Jabba the Hutt because when we see him in Return of the Jedi, he is an intimidating character. He is the kind of character, the kind of antagonist whose tail you would not step on because you wouldn't get away with it. And I really think that this scene should have been left on the cutting room floor. There was a reason why this scene was cut out. And it's nice to see it as a deleted scene, but to incorporate it back into the film is just wrong for me. Well, it wouldn't be wrong if George Lucas had made the theatrical cut in high definition format and made it available to the fans alongside with his special edition, similar to the Blade Runner release. There's so many versions of Blade Runner, and let the consumer, let the fan choose which version he wants to watch, but don't repress the theatrical version. Don't make your version, the special edition, the best format as far as visually, and make the theatrical version half-ass. Because even though George Lucas released the Laserdisc transfers, compared to the Blu-ray releases of the special editions, they can't compete. Of course, the Blu-ray special editions look way better because they're in 4K now, and we have a DVD letterbox Laserdisc transfer for the theatrical cuts, and it just can't compete. That's why I recommend all the fans that want to see the theatrical cuts in a high definition format to pursue Harmy's despecialized edition versions. Now, some things in the special editions I do appreciate. The sound of the official Blu-ray and 4K releases are outstanding. They cannot compete with any fan edit of the theatrical versions whatsoever. And also, the inclusion of the Biggs Darklighter scene adds an emotional weight to him dying for Luke Skywalker during the Death Star attack. And also, little fixes like how they fixed Darth Vader's lightsaber effect as our protagonist escaped the Death Star was needed. And little fixes like this for the special editions are highly appreciated. And as much as I love Harmy's despecialized editions, the special effects, the remade special effects for the Death Star attack cannot compete. And this is not a negative criticism of Harmy's work on the despecialized editions. It's just that he had limitations as far as what he had to work with. Working with a Laserdisc transfer that was released in letterbox format on a DVD and trying to rotoscope the special effects for the Death Star attack and comparing it to the official 4K release, it just cannot compete. And this is why I prefer the official Lucasfilm releases in regards to watching the Death Star attack. Typically, what I do is I watch the first half of the film as the despecialized edition, and then the second half of the film, I'll watch the official Lucasfilm release. So, in a way, I get the best of both worlds. Now, let's talk about that epic, unforgettable opening shot for this film, the one with the Star Destroyer chasing the rebels. In this one shot that blew everybody's mind away back in 1977, we are basically shown through symbolism how strong and how mighty the Empire is in contrast with the rebels. We are shown what the rebels are truly up against and how this is going to be a huge uphill battle against the Empire. The work by John Dykstra and his peers cannot be overlooked here. The way the motion control camera is able to put you right into the middle of this action, it's just epic. The way the Imperial Star Destroyer just goes on and on and on forever, truly illustrating just how powerful they are in comparison to the tiny rebel ship. In regards to the special effects, George Lucas outlined the concept of the film primarily with regard to what the special effects would be, what he wanted to do, and what he wanted to have happen. More than anything else, he wanted to get fluidity of motion, the ability to move the camera around so that you could create the illusion of actually photographing spaceships from a camera platform in space. To get his visual points across, Lucas was armed with the project he begun 2 years ago, the aerial battle short created from films on television. So basically, George wanted momentum in the dogfights and in the space battles, and he edited footage from World War II movies to show others what he was aiming for. Some of the footage he took from the films The Dam Busters, 633 Squadron, and Tora Tora Tora. George Lucas states, at one point I had 20 to 25 hours worth of videotape, he says. I condensed that down to 4 or 5 hours, then I looked through that and condensed it down shot by shot to about an hour. We transferred about an hour to 16 millimeter film and then I cut that down to 8 minutes. I would have the plane going from right to left and a plane coming towards us and flying away from us to see if the movement would generate excitement. We showed the film to John Dykstra when he started. I described what I was going to do and then I showed him the film and said, this is what it's going to look like. So for everyone that wants to believe that George Lucas doesn't know how to edit a film and that Marsha Lucas, his wife, came along and saved the film single-handedly, that's just not true, man. George Lucas is a great editor. He knows about pacing, he knows about momentum, he knows about cutting on action. Now, in order to achieve George Lucas's goals, this is what gave birth to Industrial Light and Magic and John Dykstra building the motion control camera. The great thing about this collaborative effort is that Industrial Light and Magic, the technicians, John Dykstra, is that they were left alone to be creative. John Dykstra and I sat down with Joe Johnston, Lucas says. John took the models and said that we had to change them for his technical needs more than anything else. The wings had to be fatter or they wouldn't show up in blue screen, and we had to flatten the bodies up so we could fit the suspension bars in. Joe was the one who added all the aesthetics in terms of detailing. And again, Joe Johnston, he is well known for his films The Rocketeer, one of my favorites, and Captain America, The First Avenger. Now, to understand why the motion control camera was needed, one has to appreciate where special effects were at the time. If a director wanted a shot of several starships flying through space, his team would have to combine various pieces of film, all shot separately. A starfield, each spaceship, lasers, perhaps a planet, and so on. The different pieces of film would then be combined with an optical printer, which would enable the compositor to arrange the several pieces into one. This was very expensive and a tricky process for a number of reasons. The miniature set would have to be left standing until the film came back. It was a hot set because they have to use it again if any mistake had been made. Moreover, the process was so complicated that nearly all shots had to be static. The camera could not move because it could never successfully and repeatedly film all the needed elements if it did. The Star Wars had an estimated 350 shots, each with as many as 7 or 8 elements, which represented a staggering amount of the time and money doing it in the contemporary way. So we had to create systems that would allow us to shoot a shot, tear down the rig, then set up and shoot another shot with the certainty that it would be okay one way or another. Dykstra continues. We needed to be able to record the information using the latest techniques to ensure that we were going to get something good to start out with, but also, if we didn't get the shot the first day, a camera that would enable us to go back and do it again. Lucas's short film of aerial action had also made it clear to everyone at ILM that the status quo of science fiction static spaceships flying on rails wasn't going to be satisfactory. The X-Wings and TIE fighters were going to have to dive, weave, and bank. Before we developed the equipment for Star Wars, those moves could be made, Dykstra says, but it was a very complex problem to get them combined into one shot. You could make a zoom or a pan or a tilt during a shot, but to zoom, pan, and tilt in the same shot and maintain matte integrity was really difficult. So the moves were primarily linear in the films of that time. Complex moves had been created for commercials that had been one shot, but they'd never been attempted on such an ambitious scale because it was too risky and expensive. They weren't viable in terms of achieving the effect over and over in a variety of situations. Not only would elements within the shot have to maneuver more freely, but to fit the director's vision, the camera would also have to be able to move as if it were a handheld device in a cinema verite film that way. People would feel like the space battle was real. Nearly every other film up until then had used what was referred to as the locked off shot, in which the camera wouldn't move during the special effects shot. To audiences, this was a telltale sign that they were about to see something fake. Nice, perhaps, but fake. Because up until that moment in the film, the actors and objects, as well as the camera, would move about in a familiar way. And then suddenly, everything would become still. Consciously or unconsciously, this would be a signal to the audience that something not occupying the same space as the actors was about to appear. But Lucas was adamant that he wanted his effects to occupy the same reality as his protagonists. It really means making the viewer feel as though it's a real situation, Dykstra says. You can move the camera, you can watch a ship come from a distance and pan and follow him and watch him go away, covering a 180-degree field of view. In the old shots, you saw a very narrow cone of vision. Everybody knows that you can line up one shot and have it look right if you don't move the camera. But if you start moving the camera, that is the subliminal cue to the person watching it, even if he knows nothing about film, that he's watching real live action photography. Because the moving camera puts him in a space. Instead of viewing a postcard, He's seeing a three-dimensional reality. The motion control camera would solve many of these special effects puzzles because it could be programmed to repeat its actions exactly, an idea that had been around for several years. In fact, the camera would be the combination of three machines that already existed in different forms: a specialized camera, a specialized mechanical rig, and a specialized electronic control device, all of which came to be called the Dykstra Flex. We had an electronic control system that was far more sophisticated but not nearly as useful. We had a mechanical drive system that was also more sophisticated but not nearly as versatile. Those elements were designed by somebody else. We went in and tried to figure out how to use them. Star Wars was our first opportunity to take those devices and make a device that incorporated all of their best aspects, plus any good aspects that we could come up with, and eliminate the problems. Special effects cinematographer Richard Edlund adds, my main desire was to keep the camera as small as possible so that it could get as close as possible to whatever it was photographing without depth of field becoming a problem. Depth of field being the worst problem in miniatures, because if anything is at all soft, it ruins the shot. Everything was going to have to be absolutely crisp, and to do so, they had to build their own computers. In addition, Vista Vision film was also the ideal format for special effects that were going to involve a considerable amount of duping. The Vista Vision system had been developed in the 1950s by Paramount and Technicolor, but it was short lived. Instead of vertical 4 perforation fill frames, Vista Vision used horizontal 8 perforation frames, literally twice the real estate as standard 35mm film, which would still be used for all the regular live action photography. It gave us double the quality up front, Edlund says. It's like anything else. The more area you use to record the information, the more information is recorded, the more detail, Dykstra adds. Now, another thing that I appreciate about this film is the cinematography by Gilbert Taylor and how he, in collaboration with George Lucas, created this lived in world environment, this aesthetic that's everything is dirty and seems used and run down. It really makes the galaxy of Star Wars feel that more believable. It almost has a documentary vibe to it, and I really appreciate the aesthetic, especially in comparison with the prequels where everything looks too squeaky clean. It doesn't even look like the same continuity. It doesn't even look like the same galaxy, the same franchise, frankly. And I really love how the original trilogy has that beautiful lived in world vibe to it. George Lucas states in regards to the aesthetics of the film, I'm trying to make everything look very natural. A casual, almost I've seen this before look, he says in 1975. You look at the paintings of the Tuscan Raiders and the Banthas and you say, oh yeah, Bedouins. Then you look at it some more and say, wait a minute, that's not right. Those aren't Bedouins. And what are those creatures back there? Like the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter battle, you say, I've seen that. It's World War II. But wait a minute, that isn't any kind of jet I've ever seen before. I want the whole film to have that quality. Lucas also adds, I'm trying to make a film that looks very real, with a nitty gritty feel, which is hard to do in a film that is essentially a fantasy. Photographically, I'm working on a filtered look, nostalgic, a looking back quality. I'm using a lighting style that is very dramatic in the style of Greg Toland, the cinematographer on Citizen Kane and My Darling Clementine, using strong shadows. Framing wise, I'm going to try for a semi documentary loose frame that will give it a nervous now quality, a sense of being captured, which will look real but at the same time be slightly fantastic. Binding all those things together will create hopefully a fantasy documentary look. In this film, I'm going to use a documentary frame but with theatrical lighting. I like to have that edge of reality because I want the movies to make you believe they are real. I try to do it with the acting too. With every other science fiction movie, you remember what the set looks like. You know exactly the costumes they were wearing because it all stands out and it all looks like it's been designed. I'm working very hard to keep everything non symmetrical. Nothing looks like it belongs with anything else. You walk into a set and there's lots of different influences, not just one influence. It's a very common thing in science fiction to see a set that has one influence. Everything matches. The chairs match the table, match the rug, match the design of the doors, match the door handle, match the lamps. I want it to look like one thing came from one part of the galaxy and another thing came from another part of the galaxy. Joe Johnston says George wanted all the rebel ships to look secondhand, old, and beat up. He wanted them to look like they weren't as well built or well designed as the Imperial ships. It's more improvisational and linked to the style I use in directing, George says, which is to have more than one camera and lead back away from the people so that the actors essentially play the scenes themselves. The cameras are like onlookers, and you aren't right in there. People aren't acting to the cameras, people are acting to each other. I won't really demand that they get the lines right. They can play as much as they want with what they've got, which makes for a more casual, sometimes more intense interaction between actors rather than just having every little piece be perfect and done to the camera. Now, I love that scene when Darth Vader emerges on the rebel ship and the smoke from the shootout is just kind of veiling his presence and then he just slowly emerges through the smoke. I love his entry. It was such a great entrance for this iconic villain. And the cinematography mixed with the documentary elements really makes this feel like this is taking place somewhere else. I love the term that George Lucas came up with, this fantasy documentary feel, this fantasy documentary aesthetic. And it had to be highly influential for the films such as Alien, Blade Runner, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, one of my favorite scenes out of this film is when Luke Skywalker is looking at the twin suns on Tatooine after being shut down by his uncle for joining the academy. And the way John Williams' score just plays and its juxtaposition with Luke's yearning and longing to go on this adventure, it's just a real beautiful thing that resonates with so many people. Luke is the perfect everyman. And Luke Skywalker's story is very similar to the legend of King Arthur. Even though there is no single version of the King Arthur legend that is considered canon, there are central characters and other elements that are inherent in all versions, and Luke's story shares these similar elements. For instance, both stories have a sword which symbolizes the beginning of the hero's journey and the legacy that both characters inherit. King Arthur, as a young man, unaware that he is the son of the king, proves he is worthy to be king when he pulls the Excalibur sword out of the stone, showing that he is the son of the king. Luke is given his father's lightsaber, the weapon of a Jedi Knight, during the time when the Jedi were at the brink of extinction. This act was a gesture from his mentor to invite Luke to continue the legacy of the Jedi, just like his father before him. Also, both Luke and King Arthur have mentor figures. Luke had Obi-Wan Kenobi, and King Arthur had Merlin the Wizard. Furthermore, Merlin looks over King Arthur from afar when he was a young boy, like Obi-Wan does Luke, before both characters know of their inherited legacies. Also, both characters were raised outside of their nuclear families. In addition, both King Arthur and his father have to confront the past sins of their father and the consequences of those sins. And even though the revelation that Luke's father is Darth Vader was not invented until the sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, I still want to address this similarity that Luke has with King Arthur. Now, King Arthur's father committed adultery with the wife of his enemy, and how he was able to do so was with the aid of Merlin, who disguised Arthur's father as his enemy using magic. Therefore, Arthur becomes the illegitimate son of his father, and this was controversial during the time because having children out of wedlock was extremely taboo. Later, Arthur's envious half sister, the daughter of his father's enemy, seduces Arthur during a time when he was unaware of their familial ties, and she gives birth to his nephew and his ultimate adversary, Mordred. Now, with Luke, the past sins of his father was his partaking in the great purge of exterminating most of the Jedi. And whether you're a fan of Disney canons, Ben Solo, aka Kylo Ren, or Legends canons, Jason Solo, aka Darth Cadus, both timelines have Luke's nephew as his sworn enemy, which definitely is a similarity shared with the legend of King Arthur. There is also, without a doubt, great similarities between the characters Obi-Wan Kenobi and Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings books. And another thing that I just want to add is that Leia is such a great character. She totally broke the norm during the time this film was released. She totally turned the whole damsel in distress archetype on its head by taking charge of her own rescue and just showing that she was able to advocate for herself and able to exert for herself and fight for herself. And she was such a great character with great writing. The banter between her, Han, and Luke was just great, as well as the banter between C3PO and R2D2. This was great writing because the humor utilized wit. There wasn't gags. It wasn't like Jar Jar Binks slipping on a banana peel humor intended for toddlers. This was writing that made the comedy so good, and I really appreciate it. Now, one of the most powerful scenes in this film is with the death of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru when Luke returns back to the Lars homestead and sees their charred bodies, their dead remains, and how they were just burned to a crisp. That totally was something out of a John Ford Western. And that juxtaposition with John Williams' score was such a powerful moment in the film. It was so sad and tragic, and at the same time, you could feel the push that Luke needed to go on his adventure. There was nothing left for him there on Tatooine anymore, and I really enjoyed the way this scene played out. And John Williams' music really sold the scene. It was so powerful. This, and when Luke is looking at the twin sons after being rejected by Uncle Owen, were really powerful scenes. Luke is the perfect everyman. We are Luke. Mark Hamill did such a great job acting this character out. Now, after this scene, it brings us to probably my most favorite scene out of the entire Star Wars saga, and that's when Luke and Obi-Wan go into the cantina, and that confrontation between Luke and the guy that's trying to bully him with his buddy. Man, this scene when Obi-Wan Kenobi steps in, he intervenes and fights on Luke's behalf, but tries to be peaceful and passive at first, and then those two bullies just push it, and he has to pull out that lightsaber. Man, the way this scene is directed, it's just amazing. and the way it's edited. It's just amazing. This scene right here, that is like basically like, I don't know, like 20 seconds or something, is infinitely better than the 15-minute showdown on Mustafar in Revenge of the Sith, simply because it feels real. This thing was cut almost like a documentary and like a samurai film. The way Obi-Wan Kenobi just pulls out his lightsaber, you see it briefly, and then the way the film is cut to make it feel like you're right there in the middle of the action, and then you just see the guy's severed arm on the floor, and it's just, the scene's done, and it's just like, whoa, such a powerful scene to introduce the lethality of the lightsaber and to introduce the skill of a Jedi, of Obi-Wan Kenobi, a seasoned Jedi. I love the way this scene is directed. And it didn't hit me until recently. I've seen this film hundreds of times, man. And when I saw this scene for the last time, I was just blown away. It was like my adult mind that is now seasoned with film and cinema from all over the world, and it has a true appreciation now of true cinema. When I saw this scene, I was like, man, the way this scene is cut, the way this scene is directed, the way it's acted, it's just perfect. True, it's like George Lucas said, it was fantasy documentary style. And another thing that this scene proves is that less is more with the lightsabers. One issue with the prequels is that it feels like the Jedi pull out the lightsabers for anything and everything. But when you use the lightsaber sparingly, they become more special. And when they are used, you feel like something serious is about to go down. This is the perfect example of less is more. Show me less of the lightsaber so I can appreciate it. Because if the Jedi or whatever character uses it all the time, it just doesn't feel special anymore. In the original trilogy, the lightsabers are used sparingly. And when they are used, you feel like something special is about to happen, something very serious. And I really appreciate that. And this scene, the one in the cantina with Ben Kenobi cutting off the bully's arm, is the perfect example of that. Now, in regards to Han shooting Greedo, obviously I prefer Han shooting Greedo in cold blood. Han shot first. However, the change in the latest 4K release for the official Lucasfilm version of A New Hope, I mean, it's not that bad. They've improved significantly on it. The editing has improved the whole scene. But nevertheless, of course, I prefer Han shooting Greedo first in cold blood. It was defense, man. Greedo was going to kill him. It was a stupid and unnecessary change. But as far as just visual presentation, it's a subtle change. It's not like the Jabba the Hutt deleted scene being inserted back into the film that totally ruins the pacing and momentum of the film. I don't think the change of basically Han having to dodge the first shot from Greedo messes with the sequence as far as the momentum of the film. However, it does change the character because now instead of Han being presented as a cold hearted, ruthless cowboy, space cowboy, now he will only kill you if you shoot first. So it totally ruins that ruthlessness about the character that we were initially introduced to in the theatrical cuts, if you grew up to the theatrical cuts. It is a change to the character, and I don't like it. So, as far as aesthetics, as far as pacing and momentum, the change is very subtle. You could barely notice. But if you're paying attention to the nuances of character development and character presentation, it changes Han significantly, and I don't like it. And I prefer the theatrical cut any day. Now, let's talk about the Millennium Falcon and the model work for all the beautiful spaceships that are now so iconic to pop culture. The TIE Fighter, the X Wing, the Death Star, the Millennium Falcon is just such an iconic ship. And what I love about the Millennium Falcon is that it's the ultimate space bucket. It's like a beat up Honda with nitrous under the hood. That's what I love about the Millennium Falcon. It may not look like much, but it got it where it counts. Great line for the film. And it's really important to note how George Lucas came up with the initial designs for these models. So during their first meeting in November 1974, George Lucas drew three sketches: a TIE Fighter, an X Wing, and a Death Star to show Ralph McQuarrie what he had in mind. And this is probably the first conceptual record of these designs presented right here on screen. So George Lucas knew what he wanted, he had it in his mind. And if you see his sketches, they're not too far off from the final and finished product. And I really think that is commendable because he really came up with those designs all by himself in his head. And then Ralph McQuarrie and the model makers took it to the next level. And the concept of the Death Star is truly a terrifying one. The destruction of Alderaan makes the Empire truly feel like a legitimate threat. And I really felt like that was a very powerful sequence. And you really believe that there is a chance that not everybody will survive this film because the Empire is such a huge and significant threat to our heroes, the protagonists. Now, I really enjoy the Obi-Wan Kenobi training sequence where he instructs Luke Skywalker with the idea that his eyes can deceive him. And this really leads to the true message of the film, but in a subtle way before we get to the true revelation of the meaning of this film during the Death Star trench run sequence. And what I'm talking about is that the theme is to believe, to believe, faith. That is the message of the film, in my opinion. And the subtle hint is right here when Obi-Wan tells Luke Skywalker, to use the blast shield to cover his eyes and basically let his instincts guide him. This is going to tie in later when he ignores using the device to find the weak point in the Death Star, and instead he uses his feelings. He puts his faith into the Force. And to me, that is the message of the film. It's all about believing, having faith, and I love that. And an additional thing that made this film such a significantly moving film is the chemistry between Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher. Great chemistry, perfect casting, and it really all comes together when they're in that garbage chute. And you just see their bickering and their banter, and then you have to see them work together. And when the Millennium Falcon is fighting the TIEs in the space dogfight, excellent banter, great chemistry. I cannot praise it enough. Great acting all across the board, especially from Alec Guinness, who was nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the Academy Awards in 1978 for his performance in Star Wars. And Alec Guinness, what can be said about the guy that hasn't been said? He is an outstanding actor, one of the best to ever come across the silver screen. And the scene where Leia and Luke have to use the grappling hook and rope to cross the bridge, it was such great Flash Gordon swashbuckling goodness. I love it. It really tapped into that vibe. And Ralph McQuarrie comments on this scene, stating, "This was set designer John Barry's idea to have this cliffhanger scene where the bridge retracts and Luke throws the little hook and swings her across. They call it the Lash LaRue scene. This was after we had about 3 days of talks with John Barry to introduce him to the project. I sat in because George thought I could do some sketches maybe while we were talking, but it was definitely established at that point that I was a sketch artist and not the art director because John was going to be the art director. So I thought that was very interesting to know that the set designer, John Barry, is the one that came up with this sequence, and I'm really grateful for that contribution because it's such an iconic scene that everybody knows. Now, another interesting thing to note is that Yavin Base is Tikal in Guatemala. And I really like that because I'm really a big fan of Mesoamerican anthropological work. I love the Aztec and Mayan culture, and just to know that Tikal was used as the base for Yavin, it's such a great thing. And Tarkin, Peter Cushing's performance as Tarkin is just outstanding. Peter Cushing is a great actor. He's in the same league as Alec Guinness, and Tarkin's pride definitely was his downfall. He really let it get the best of him, and this is why he was ultimately killed in the destruction of the first Death Star. He refused to entertain the notion that the rebels could even destroy the Death Star, and that was the price he had to pay. Now, the trench run sequence has so much tension, so much suspense, and this is where the filmmakers, everyone's contributions come together in unison, like a symphonic composition. You have John Dykstra and ILM's work with the motion control camera, the model work. You got John Williams' epic score. You got Marsha Lucas's, Richard Chu's, and Paul Hirsch's editing. You have the performance of the actors, and you have George Lucas's story all coming together, creating this tension and the suspense. It's such a beautiful thing. The pacing, the momentum, the film grabs you and never lets you go. And you really feel like there's a possibility that the heroes could die. And then you hear Obi-Wan's voice saying, use the Force. And here comes the universal message. All of us become Luke Skywalker in that moment, no matter what your race is, no matter what your gender is, your religion, doesn't matter. It's a universal message that resonates with humanity, and we want to believe we are part of something greater. It's all about believing. It's all about having faith, a day of victory to believe in something and be victorious. It resonates with everybody, and it's such a beautiful scene. And I think this is the perfect opportunity to talk about the work of George Lucas's wife, Marcia Lucas, who had a significant impact and influence on why not only the first Star Wars film, but the original trilogy in general was so successful. It was a collaborative effort. As I previously stated, the original editor, John Jimson, was fired from the film because initially it lacked energy, and Marcia Lucas was hired, and she went back and forth between working on Star Wars and editing Martin Scorsese's New York, New York. Now, here is an interesting quote. Marcia's faith never wavered. She was at once George's most severe critic and most ardent supporter. She wasn't afraid to say she didn't understand something in Star Wars or to point out sections that bored her. Lucas got angry, but he knew Marcia was articulating his own suspicions. I'm real hard, Marcia says, but I only tell him what he already knows. She was also the only person to whom Lucas could vent his frustration. A marriage where both people are in the same business and both are very strong is a challenge. You've got to go through a lot of changes, says George. Marcia's suggestions were among the few Lucas took seriously. Now, these quotes are sourced from Tom Pollock, who was manager of business affairs and was responsible for George Lucas securing the merchandising rights to Star Wars and the sequel rights. Here is an additional quote. George had a secret weapon in Marcia. Like every director who has worked with her, Spielberg thinks she has an excellent eye. Marcia is indispensable to Lucas because she compensates for his deficiencies. Where George is not unduly concerned with character and lacks faith in the audience's patience, Marcia figures out how a movie can be made warmer, how the characters can be given depth and resonance. Marcia says, I have an innate ability to take good material and make it better, and to take fair material and make it good, Marcia says. I think I'm even an editor in real life. On the business front, Marcia was pivotal in the creation of Lucasfilm and Skywalker Ranch, which she also managed while Lucas was shooting Return of the Jedi. Mark Hamill remembers her being a severely underestimated influence in her husband's films and whom was responsible for providing their warmth and emotion. You can see a huge difference in the films that he does now and the films that he did when he was married. I know for a fact that Marcia Lucas was responsible for convincing him to keep that little kiss for luck before Carrie Fisher and I swing across the chasm in the first film. Oh, I don't like it. People laugh in the previews. And she said, George, they're laughing because it's so sweet and unexpected. And her influence was such that if she wanted to keep it in, it was in. When the little mouse robot comes up when Harrison Ford and I are delivering Chewbacca to the prison and he roars at it and it screams sort of and runs away, George wanted to cut that and Marcia insisted that he keep it in. She was really the warmth and heart of those films, a good person he could talk to and bounce ideas off. Now, I think this quote by Mark Hamill really illustrates why the prequels turn out the way they did. Whether you love the prequels or hate them or just are indifferent to them, there is definitely a difference in the filmmaking quality, in the tone of those films. And I really think that the reason why the original trilogy was the way it was and has more reverence from people in general is because it was a collaborative effort. And I really think Marcia Lucas's input was very important and sorely lacking in the prequel era. And that's not to say that the prequels don't have their good qualities. They do. But Marcia Lucas's input was sorely missed nevertheless. It was her, for example, who decided Obi-Wan Kenobi should die on the Death Star. I was struggling with the problem that I had this sort of climactic scene that had no climax about two-thirds of the way of the film, Lucas told Rolling Stone in 1977. I had another problem in the fact that there was no real threat in the Death Star. The villains were like tenpins. You get into a gunfight with them and they just get knocked over. As I originally wrote it, Ben Kenobi and Vader had a sword fight and Ben hits the door and the door slams closed and they all run away and Vader is left standing there with egg oil on his face. This was dumb. They run into the Death Star and they sort of take over everything and they run back. It totally diminished any impact the Death Star had. Anyway, I was rewriting, I was struggling with that plot problem when my wife suggested that I kill off Ben, which she thought was a pretty outrageous idea. And I said, well, that is an interesting idea, and I had been thinking about it. Her first idea was to have 3PO get shot. And I said impossible because I wanted to start and end the film with the robots. I wanted the film to really be about the robots and have the theme be framework for the rest of the movie. But then, the more I thought about Ben getting killed, the more I liked the idea because one, it made the threat of Vader greater, and that tied in with the Force and the fact that he could use the dark side. both Alec Guinness and I came up with the thing of having Ben go on afterwards as part of the Force. Now, in a rare interview for Peter Biskind's 1997 book Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, Marcia Lucas states, I felt we were both partners. Partners in the ranch, partners in our home, and we did these films together. I wasn't a 50% partner, but I felt I had something to bring to the table. I was the more emotional person who came from the heart, and George was the more intellectual and visual, and I thought that provided a nice balance. And you know what? I cannot agree anymore. I really feel like that is the perfect balance right there because it's so true about George Lucas, in my opinion. George is more of a visual. He's more of an intellectual guy. He's more concerned with the technical aspects of filmmaking. And I really felt that Marsha Lucas, her contribution about what is important as far as emotion and character, that is what made Star Wars, the original trilogy, so special. And I really feel like that emotional aspect, that character, that heart was missing from the prequels. It was really more focused on the technical aspects of filmmaking. Now, here is an amazing interview with the woman herself, Marsha Lucas, taking from a series called Galactic Innovations, Star Wars, and Rogue One. This was a very rare appearance by her because usually she likes to not be in the limelight and she kind of retired from filmmaking and she doesn't really make too many public appearances, but I was able to find this. So please enjoy this because I really feel like her work has been overlooked for so long, and we really need to start paying attention and appreciating the contributions of Marsha Lucas to Star Wars.
Let's talk
Okay,
about the
well,
Death Star
yes.
now.
Well, when we got back from London, we were editing up in Marin County, and George was flying down to ILM because he'd been in London filming, and they wrapped the filming, and he would go down every Monday morning to ILM in Van Nuys, and he'd come back on Friday nights, and then on the weekends we'd run the cuts that we were working on. And then a couple weeks later, George came to me and said, you know, Marsh, ILM needs to have the end battle cut. It's got the most visual effects, and they need to get working on that. And would you please cut it? I said, sure, I can do that. I can cut the end battle scene. And I had the shooting script to work from. I had all the Rebel pilots and the Death Star pilots in their cockpits against blue screens. Green screens we used, I think. And then I had the admiral on the Death Star who was physically watching the battle, you know. And then I had all the rebels in the rebel war room watching the battle. And then, of course, I didn't have a storyboard, and I hadn't seen any real visuals of what anything was going to look like. But I was given a 16 millimeter reel of about 6 minutes of all the black and white footage you could get from World War II movies. So there were dogfights, and there were bombing runs, and there were planes blowing up, and there were planes crashing. And I had all this black and white footage. It was 16 millimeter, so I had to blow it up to 35 millimeter. And then I began cutting, and I realized right away I didn't have enough planes, not right to left, not left to right, not enough explosions. So I reprinted this black and white dupe about 5 or 6 times, so I had enough planes, enough POVs, and you can kind of see in some of the shots.
Yeah, that same Stuka gets blown up 4 times.
Yes, it gets blown up 4 times, and that's the way I work the scene. Now in the script, when Luke goes down and makes his trench run, he uses the computer and he misses the shot. The shot doesn't go in, so he goes back up to a dogfight. He has to go down again and make a second run, and on the second run, of course, you know, Obi-Wan tells him to use the Force, and he puts the computer away, and he's going to make the shot this way. So while we were looking at this scene with the 2 runs, we all agreed that it was too long. It was definitely too long. Luke had to make one run, and he had to have Darth Vader come in to, chase him down. And then we had the rebels on the thing. And then we decided, the thing that was missing was a time clock. Like, how much time does Luke have to make this shot before something horrible is going to happen? And so we had the earlier footage from the film where the Death Star loads up, and gets ready to fire, and they shoot Princess Leia's planet. They obliterate Alderaan, Princess Leia's
Alderaan.
planet. Anyway, so we had all that footage of the Death Star gearing up, and we had Tarkin watching what was going on. So we added that time element. So ILM comes through once again and has a beautiful shot of the rebel planet with a kind of a graphic showing that the Death Star is getting ready to line up to make their shot. So it's 7 minutes and counting, and then later it's 3 minutes and counting. And so I needed to have that tension so that can Luke make the shot before Darth Vader's going to shoot him out of the sky because Vader's on his tail? And can he make the shot before the Death Star is going to obliterate the rebel planet? So I made it all work. I cut it all together. Everybody agreed it was working. And ILM was very pleased that they didn't have to do half of the special effects shots that happened when he made 2 runs. Now he only had to make 1 run. So we saved some money.
Not bad.
And it was really, really, really critical to me when I was editing the scene that it has to be a surprise when Han Solo comes flying in. He blows Darth Vader out of Darth Vader goes spinning out, and Luke makes the shot, and the Death Star explodes. And that moment had to be so critical and important that when he comes in to save the day, the audience would go, yeah, yes. And I think I made that happen. I think I accomplished that.
You did. You did, Marcia. The pacing of that sequence, the intercutting of the 4 different locations is astounding. And I watched it develop at the time, and I used to see it without any sound, and even just the visual pacing of it, the way it was put together was what you and George did was just fantastic. And it shows you that you can have a script, but the real artistry of a movie is what the editor does. The technology's not as important as the person using that technology, and whether it was a moviola or an Avid, it's really the person behind it, Martian. You accomplished so much. You and your fellow editors, Richard Chu and Paul Hirsch, got Oscars for editing that film.
And then in the end, when I saw it compiled and finished, and the special effects were in, the sound was in, John Williams' fantastic score, the music was elevated again, and it was like, we did it! We made it work! We did it! We did it! We made it work. It took a lot of people, took a lot of talent to make that come to fruition.
Thank you, Marcia. Well, you are more than a galactic innovator. You're a galactic hero.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So that right there, for me, is the perfect way to end this analysis for the greatest independent film of all time and one of the greatest movies of all time, period. Star Wars. Thank you guys for listening to this analysis. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share. May the Force be with you. And last but not least, one love, people. Take care.